does want a CE learning unit for this particular presentation. We did have a survey that would have gone out on WebEx, but what we'll do is we'll just send something separately to all of your email addresses that will just get your information and send you a certificate of completion for the learning unit through your CE provider. So let's go through a little bit about our agenda. So, oh gosh, this is doing this. Oh my goodness. I'm not pressing anything and I'm seeing a lot of things being pressed. Oh my goodness. Sorry guys, just a little more technical difficulties for you. Okay, so we're starting off with our BAS series. So obviously we do not have 104, 103, or 102 yet, but what we are getting towards is building a sequence of operations and data collection. That will be where we end the series at 104. 103 is going to be around our interdependent systems. So a lot of those mechanical systems and how they actually work together to be controlled. 102, we'll talk a little bit about points and protocols. And right now you are in 101, which is what is a building automation system. So we'll learn, like I said, the benefits, the overall challenges, and just a little bit of information around BAS systems in general. So what is a building automation system? In its entirety, a building automation system is just an integrated technology solution that is designed to both monitor, control, and optimize various systems within a facility. I like to think of your BAS system as kind of your command central, your central command for your entire building. So this is where you're really going to be able to see, hey, where all systems are good to go, or Houston, we got a problem. A couple of other things that it might be known as is going to be a building management system, so a BMS, or a DDC, direct digital control system. So just kind of getting all of us on the same page for what you might be hearing or seeing in specifications. Those are probably going to be your top three, but just know they're all talking about the same thing. They're all really just talking about that integrated technology solution that is monitoring and controlling and optimizing your entire building. So what does a BAS consist of? When it's broken down in its entirety, we can pretty much break it down into two major categories: your sensors and devices and your controller processor. So within that, we're going to have a few ancillary systems that we'll talk about next. But essentially what this is meaning is that you're going to have systems like sensors and devices that are connecting with the occupancy of your building. So these are the things that are inside your building that its inhabitants or your zone, your building in general, are sensing and seeing. Your controller or your processor is just going to be what actually controls that building. And we'll talk a little bit about this as we go, but these are the two major pieces of your BAS system. It's just going to be your sensing as your devices, and your controller is really that brains of your system. The brains of the system is what's going to receive all of that data from sensors, actually process it, and send commands in order to, basically create an output and feedback for your building. It's going to manage the overall system of the building. I like to put up this slide here because it's a good one that, even though we're saying, oh yeah, BAS system, it really is just all about sensors and devices, sensors and control, and you'll hear that a lot. As we move into a bigger and better and greater system and world, we see a lot more happening on building automation systems in general. So we look at this building here, and you can think about a BAS system from anything, right? We see this as building and energy management. We see this as EV control, HVAC control, lighting control, access platforms. So we put up this slide here to kind of say that a BAS system now is becoming more and more intelligent, more and more connected, and more integrated. So we're not just talking your traditional HVAC control anymore. We're talking more along the lines of a smart building, right? You can have everything from energy management systems to access control, fire safety systems, and all of this can be considered inside of your building automation system. When we talk about what it consists of as well, I think a lot of times we like to jump right into the physical components, right? We like to say, especially as manufacturers, we're all like, this is what you'll see as a building automation system on the right. That picture on the right there is a really common architecture that you might see in a building automation system. But what we also like to point out is that there are a lot of components that are non-physical components when we start talking about a building automation system as well, that are really important to start thinking about, especially as engineers, when you're starting to build this system and you're starting to figure out how you want your building to be able to be controlled. That's where you're really going to start to see some of these non-physical components come into controls, right? So a couple of those are going to be things like emergency alarms and notifications. So, something is down. We want the correct person to be getting the correct alarm. We don't want that alarm flooding. And again, we'll go through all of this. If topics are, or if you're hearing words that you might not exactly know what they are, I promise you they will be figured out within our building automation series. But data storage and data analytics, right? This is becoming more and more prevalent as we see, data is being something that you can use in order to promote really different energy optimization. You can now use your data in different ways while still needing to maintain security on that data. Remote access. Remote access is a big one. Very infrequently now do we have somebody actually sitting in the building that they are controlling. So whether that means app monitoring, whether it means a web browser, just a way to be able to see what is happening on your BIS system. Integration with other building systems. So integration with other building systems, meaning, hey, we need everything to play nicely together. And here you'll oftentimes hear the word interoperability. So interoperability just means that all of these different components that you have from different manufacturers, that they need to play nicely in the sandbox together in order to have all of these systems working together to run your building efficiently. And finally, backup and redundancy. This can be more critical in different industries than other, but if you start to think about data centers, if you think about pharma applications, a lot of those are going to need that backup and redundancy. So when we start to think about what a building automation system encompasses, some of these non-physical components can be just as important to the overall functionality of a building automation system as the physical components that you're seeing there on the right. Obviously, both important. I think that sometimes people just tend to forget about the non-physical, which is why I like to kind of hone in on them at first. When we are talking about some of those physical components that are important, the one that I really like to point out is around the user interface. So a user interface is really important when we start talking about a building automation system because it's really going to be what interacts directly from the person and the building. So you want to be able to have a user-friendly interface to be able to access as well as potentially monitor your system, adjust your parameters, manage all of those alarms. But what's important to think about here is the different people within a building that might actually be utilizing your building automation system and how they might be utilizing them differently. So a good application here to think about is maybe a hospital, right? So you have different users of that building. You have your facility manager, you have your nurse call station, and you have your patient access or your patient accessibility experience. Each one of those people is going to want to see different pieces of your building automation system. So, you might have a nurse call station that has an alarm when a certain door is open, but you don't want your patient to be able to see that. You want your patient to be able to see something that says, oh, I need these blinds closed or I need these lights turned off. So it's something where when you're starting to design your building automation system, really start to think about what people will be interfacing with that building. And you want to have something that allows those folks to interact with that building in the most easily accessible and user-friendly way. Finally, when we talk about the components of a building automation system, the last one that we're going to talk about there is our network infrastructure. So our network infrastructure, you will see this slide again with Moose in our BAS 102. So don't get too bogged down into what all of these actually look like. I just like to put this up there again to say that there are a lot of different ways that all of these physical components do talk to one another. And when you're starting to design and think about the idea behind using a building automation system, we want to make sure that all of those components can talk to each other. And not just talk to each other, but talk to each other in a cost-effective manner that is also easy to communicate, right? So that way, when you do have fun technical difficulties, they're going to be a little bit easier to navigate than this good old Teams and WebEx call was. So think about that when you're going into a building automation system of just, hey, all of these components are going to have different ways of talking to each other, and we need to make sure they can all do it in an easy manner as well as an effective manner. Um, oh, I like to put this up here too, just to show you guys how many different protocols there actually are. So how many different things are talking in different languages. If we look at the top here, we're going to see that there's one centralized user interface, and that's what we were talking about before. But then within each of these different buckets, you'll see that there are different methods of communication for each different one. So your operating system might have a different way of speaking than your HVAC system, or than your analytics, or than your EVs. So what this slide is showing, and you know, don't dive too deep into it, but again, we can provide you with all these slides afterwards as well, just so you can kind of see, you know, when you're starting to design this system, it is something to think about that not all of these systems are going to be talking the same language, but we need to find a way to get them all working in harmony to be able to have that centralized control of a building automation system. When we start talking, you know, those are really the big components behind a building automation system. But what is the purpose? Why do we need a building automation system? This slide came from a real estate survey that happened in 2024. And one of the biggest initiatives that we're seeing from building owners is IoT and smart tech. So that top one there is saying that investing in the Internet of Things and connecting buildings and smart buildings is the top thing that our building owners are thinking about. So us as engineers, when we're deciding what we want in our buildings, we want them to be connected. We want to be able to talk to them. We want folks to be able to dial in remotely. You know, we want all of that interconnectivity just because our building owners are wanting that. Another really important piece of this, when we talk about being able to not only just manage and control our building, but there was that first word there in our first slide was optimize our building. So when we look at what building owners are concerned about, net zero buildings and smart buildings that are using energy efficiently are top of mind for all of our building owners. So not only do we want to be able to manage and to be able to view all of these things that are happening inside of our building, but we also want to be able to optimize them. You know, we want to be able to optimize these things for efficiency, for energy efficiency. And as we go through this BLITZ CE credit, we will be able to show you guys kind of some of the differences of smart buildings and how it can really make an impact and make a difference. And this all starts with creating a building automation system. You know, if you can't track your energy usage, what are you really doing, right? And we'll talk about that, especially. We'll actually end on that one, talking about the fact that LEED and WELL buildings are achieving higher rent rates as well as higher rental occupancy. So when you're looking at what building owners are really interested in, it's being driven by a few things, but it really is truly being driven by the fact that, you know, you need all of these systems in place to keep your building running smartly, efficiency, as well as an enhanced occupancy comfort. So when we look at that, we're looking at the two different things that our building is doing, right? Our monitoring and our controlling, but our energy efficiency. So the purpose behind a building control system in general is, like we said, going to be that monitor and control. It's going to provide centralized control over our building systems, and that can include everything that we talked about, including HVAC, security, lighting. Really, any part of your building that is automated is going to be within that building automation system capability, but as well as that energy efficiency. So being able to optimize our energy efficiency, maybe based on occupancy, based on the time of day, the environmental conditions of that building. All of these things are going to be able to monitored as well as controlled within your building and automation system. Further purpose behind it, you know, it's great that we have this energy conservation in the back of our minds, but what about occupancy comfort? So thinking back into that hospital setting, hospitals get so much of their funding based on the surveys that patients get. So, you know, thinking about a building automation system of a hospital, well, your occupancy comfort is going to be top of mind. That's how they're getting some of their funding. So when you think about occupancy comfort, it can be everything from regulating temperature, humidity, lighting, anything that's really going to create this optimal comfort with that automatic and user-based adjustments. What's really interesting here too, just thinking about that hospital environment, one of the biggest complaints in hospital is the noise level. So if there's a way that your building automation system can reduce the noise level in patient recovery rooms, that's going to be huge. And so again, when we start thinking about the purpose behind this building automation system, these should be some of the things that are triggered in your head when you start to think about, okay, well, if we want to reduce noise occupancy, what is going to be needed in that room to do so? What sensors are we going to need? What control are we going to need? And again, that's the purpose behind a building automation system. Second one down there is going to be around security and safety. So security and safety can also be a big part of your building automation system. It can integrate access control, cameras, fire alarms, and can even go so far as to support emergency protocols and alerts. A lot of different systems are going to have different access control systems, both from a technology standpoint, but as well from a physical standpoint. So, if you think about badging into your office every morning, that's part of a building automation system. That security and that safety is, again, all relevant when we start talking about what you want that building to be able to interface with its occupants. Finally, we mentioned this one before, but remote access. Remote access is a big piece right now. I think as we branch into newer generations, everybody expects to be able to do things on their phone. They expect to be able to do things on the go. So when you start talking with building owners about what their expectations are for their building, remote access or app control could be something that they want to have the ability to access in their building. So again, that just kind of dives into the building automation purpose. We want to be able to remote access in for quick adjustments, for emergency responses, just to even see what our building is doing that day. All of those things are relevant and applicable within a building automation system. Couple others, data analytics. This is a really big piece of what we're seeing right now as just an industry trend is everybody's trying to capture and collect all of this data that their building is utilizing, right? Specifically around optimizing your energy usage. So you have to have a way to aggregate all of that data in a manner that is actually useful. So being able to tie this into your building automation system and actually see whether it's a sub meter or whether it's meters on your actual building, you want to be able to get some of that data and actually use it in a meaningful way to be able to reduce your energy consumption, from day to day or year over year. There's even some fun little dashboards that are on building automation systems that might be able to compare one building to another. So we've actually seen it before where people kind of have like a competition from one building to another if they're relatively similar buildings on who uses the least energy per month. So that's another piece of this that you might want to be able to talk to somebody about when it comes to their building. Maintenance and diagnostics. This is a big one when it comes to both predictive maintenance as well as the actual upkeep and maintenance of your building. Being able to identify issues and actually send maintenance alerts to the correct person. Excuse me. For proactive upkeep, this can be a really good way to get your maintenance budget down, right? If you can figure out the faults before they turn into very big faults and very big system outages, that is a huge piece of a building automation system. So being able to do some of those proactive maintenance and diagnostics is a big deal when it comes to choosing your building automation system and what you want to have in your building automation system. That last bullet point down there in our BAS purpose, I don't know if it's exactly a purpose, but something again to keep in mind is going to be scalability. So as we branch into larger and larger applications, you want to be able to have a building automation system that can grow as your building grows. So maybe you start with one building and then it turns into a campus of buildings. keep that in mind when you're talking with building owners to say, hey, do you plan on expanding this in the future? If you do plan on expanding this in the future, how do you want that to be integrated with our current building automation system? Do you want something that is able to be centrally scalable? Do you want a completely new building automation system? Do you want those to be able to be tied in together? So just things to think about when you start, again, building your building automation system. That scalability is definitely becoming more and more prevalent as we're seeing systems grow larger and larger, buildings are growing larger and larger. You're getting multiple campuses and multiple buildings. Oh, this is just that same example that we kind of talked through, but I like to put it in here just to get your guys' brains firing. When it comes to patient-centric solutions, this is truly the purpose behind a building automation system, right? So that twofold experience of having the enhanced patient comfort, we're thinking of that hospital building, right? Their biggest sources of funding, like I mentioned, is patient experience surveys. So that being said, if you have the ability to enhance that patient comfort, you're going to have something that will then basically get you funding further in the long run. Easy interfacing, again, being able to have a patient have something on their app that looks like what they're used to. A lot of folks now, I think it's like 70% of households have at least one or more smart devices that is app controlled. So it's definitely something that as you see it in your residential space, you're going to start to see that in the commercial space as well. A couple of those other pieces that have tied into the building automation purpose, the air quality monitoring. This is another big one when you think about not only hospitals but buildings in general. Air quality monitoring is huge. We have standards in place in our industry, as well as a lot of businesses like LEED and WELL certification status is around indoor air quality. It makes it so much better for your occupants to be in a space that has proper ventilation. A couple of these other ones on here, when you talk about this hospital as a whole in their building automation system, you can have both occupancy detection as well as lighting control integration. So being able to do daylight harvesting, being able to match the circadian rhythms. Again, this particular example is of a hospital, but even in elementary schools are one where study after study show that if you have an enhanced occupant comfort, they do learn better. So being able to control the HVAC inside of there, being able to match your circadian rhythm, all of that really does add to your user experience for the folks that are inside of your building. And that all starts with your building automation system. We kind of went into the purpose of it, and that does bleed into the benefits. So again, BS 101 is really just this overarching encompass of how we're going to start to build our automation system. So, just bear with me if some of these seem repetitive, but we're really just trying to get a handle on the BAS in its entirety. So a couple of the benefits that we've already talked a little bit about, but let's dive into them just a bit more, are going to be around energy efficiency. That's a biggie, right? So optimizing your HVAC and lighting based on things like occupancy or like the climate outside. This can reduce energy use and utility cost. And this is huge right now, especially across large buildings. We're dealing with a lot of aging infrastructure. So we're seeing a lot of times, you guys get called in to do building retrofits and finding ways to promote energy efficiency. Even if it's not a brand new building, there are still a lot of strategies that you can incorporate in a building automation system where you'll start to see really high benefits for having a BAS system when it comes to energy efficiency. Cost savings. So a lot of times, you see that upfront cost and you get a little bit of pushback, right? You get a pushback of, well, why do I even need this building automation system? Well, the cost savings that you'll see on the back end of adding a BAS system, right? You can minimize energy waste by using those demand based controls, but you also can implement strategies like we talked about before, like predictive maintenance, where you might see your maintenance budgets start to dwindle because you're able to respond faster to some of these faults that you might see when you wouldn't have had that capability before without a building automation system. Occupant comfort, I think we've kind of beaten this one to death, but it is huge. When you start talking about buildings that are achieving larger rents, that are becoming more and more occupied, we're really seeing a shift towards occupant comfort. I think folks right now, they really are having the ideal working environment. I know we saw everybody working from home. So as people are coming back into the office, that we want folks to be able to enjoy their working environment and enjoy being an occupant inside of those buildings. And that last bullet point there, when it comes to standards and compliance, this is something that we will talk about heavily in further presentations, but there are a lot of industry standards, both nationally and locally, that do apply to buildings. There are places in the country right now that we're starting to see penalties become enforced if you're not maintaining the standards and compliances with our different industry level certifications and compliance certifications. So when you think about adding a building automation system, that standards of compliance can definitely be a benefit when you start to talk about your building automation system. Oh, I guess we're going to pop into these related standards and guidelines here. So a few of those that are really pertinent to our industry, and again, we'll dive further into these, but a few of them are going to be ASHRAE 62.1. That's what we were talking about with that indoor air quality. ASHRAE standard 90.1, that's our energy standard for buildings. You do have guideline 13, which is just around actually how to specify your BAS system. And then another big one that a lot of our industry standards have started to base themselves off of is Title 24, which is California's energy code. And again, we'll go into those more in depth, but just kind of so that way you guys are aware that it's not just one standard. You are required to maintain multiple industry standards when you talk about some of these building automation systems. A few other benefits. So that optimized HVAC operation. So if we look at these two pictures here, that top picture, you're seeing a study room with, multiple people in it. You have multiple different computers. You have a lot of different heat sources. So this building, it's going to have a lot higher heat load than the picture below it, which is just one gal in the study room by herself, right? So when you start to think about what a building automation system can do here, is if it's able to respond quickly to a difference of changes from occupancy, you're going to be able to support that energy reduction during peak times. So this is really big when we start to talk about stabilizing like our grid and earning back some of those incentives. If you have a building automation system that is readily capable of adjusting based on your occupancy or based on what load you're actually needing in each different room, you're going to see a lot of benefits that come from that. And again, it's actually pretty cool. Some of the different strategies that can be in place when you start to think about things like this, we've actually seen folks that utilize Bluetooth, so that can actually utilize Bluetooth to talk to your building, that will actually be able to see how many people are in a conference room at one time or in a study room at one time. So if we take the example of like a higher education facility, right? So if you're at a college and maybe I like a super noisy atmosphere, I like to be able to bounce ideas off of other people, but say my best friend Moose, he likes to be able to study on his own. What's really cool is that there are now strategies that can be implemented using a building automation system for me to pull up my app and see which conference room I would be best suited for or which conference room Moose would be suited for. So that's just another thing that when we start to think about the differences and the things that a building automation system can do, it's no longer just about HVAC. It's about being able to provide these solutions that are really tailored to each different building and each different vertical, to be able to see, hey, what really should we start to think about as we're designing this building to set ourselves apart, to be able to make that occupant experience, to be able to save that energy. How can we really do this, right? And then that last benefit there on this screen is around that proactive maintenance, which I think we touched on before. So we'll just save that one there. Final couple benefits here are going to be, like we talked about, that long-term ROI. So you're going to see some significant returns. And, the building automation industry has now been around long enough that we're really starting to see a lot of studies come out. We have a lot of research projects. There are a lot of manufacturers that can actually point to specific projects and say, hey, this was our actual achievable savings when we put in a building automation system, or when we started all of these different types of control from our building automation system, and what we actually started to monitor. So now it's not just, the pie in the sky, oh, it's going to help you save energy. We can actually point to a lot of these research projects and tell folks how much energy was actually saved, or tell them, what the user experience has actually been. When we look at the customization and flexibility, again, the ability to be able to tailor pieces to our specific building owner's needs, you can really only do that with a building automation system. So being able to scale that to different applications is really huge when you start to think about your building automation system in general. The reason that I have a data center down there is actually for this next bullet point around improved space utilization. So, if we're looking at a data center market, if we're engineers and we're called upon to really get our BAS system in general for a data center and looking at those data center halls, right? If you can monitor your energy usage and be able to map that heat, right? Spatial heat mapping is a thing that we can do with a building automation system. If you can come to that data center owner and you can say, hey, I've noticed that we're going to be able to add another crack unit right here because we have the space to do it, you're going to be their new best friend, because it is all about space utilization. And if you're able to add something to their building because of that, and because of your building automation system, you're going to be miles ahead of the competition, right? So just being able to kind of forward think about what you might actually be able to provide in some of these different use case scenarios, to optimize their layout, to optimize their space. It's going to be huge, right? So even if you're not talking about saving energy, but there might be different ways and different KPIs that the building owner has, that when you're talking through this and you're saying, okay, we know we're going to build our building automation system, how can we differentiate ourselves to win this project? Well, this could be a pretty big piece of it, is use sensors to monitor your heat mapping and be able to tell them that, hey, you can add something here, you need to take something away here, and you're going to get more uptime and things like that. So different strategies that come with the BAS system in general. And finally, another benefit that we see is just going to be around the emergency response. So a lot of times your building automation system can actually coordinate things such as fire alarms, smoke detectors, even lighting for that quick and organized response. So just another thing to think about when you go through some of your benefits, like if you're going through the benefits with a building owner, this is something that you can employ a different strategy there. So it all sounds great, right? Sounds fantastic. We love building automation. It's really good. What are some of the challenges? What's some of the pushback that you might see in our industry? The first one that I think is probably going to be the biggest one is, again, we don't have an industry that is relatively old. It's probably 1970s is when we started to see a lot of these strategies come into place. It's when we started to see our guidelines and our industry guidelines come into place. So there might be folks out there that haven't used a building automation system before. So when we start to think about the challenges with it, complexity and integration of all of these moving pieces, it definitely can be a real challenge. So if you'll think back to that very first, the building slide that I had up there, of all of the different communication ways that all of these different systems are talking to one another, it can seem pretty overwhelming. And it can definitely seem overwhelming if you're not in this industry, right? So if you just own your building and I come up to you and I say, hey, I want to reduce my carbon footprint by X amount, how do I do it? That can really start to be complex when you think about all of these moving pieces together. So of course, we're not just going to sit here and say, yep, we get it. That's a challenge. That sucks. We're not going to say that. We're going to say, yes, that is true. But the solution is to partner with trusted vendors for a lot of that seamless integration, right? So folks that have been in the industry, folks that have done it, people that can point to different projects and say, this is what we've done. This is the savings that we've seen. This is the feedback that we've gotten. It's a big deal. So on that note too, another challenge is around the expertise and training. A lot of times there might be one facility manager for multiple buildings that needs to know how to do all of this. And it really is a specialized knowledge that's required. Um, so as we talk through this learning series, we'll talk about all of the different components, both mechanical as well as controls, that are integrated in a building automation system. And it is overwhelming. There are going to be manufacturers that will give you the controls. There are going to be controls that you need to program. And all of this requires a lot of specialized knowledge. So being able to define that targeted plan up front with your users and being able to target certain users depending on how they want to utilize the building automation system, that's going to be your solution for expertise and training. And that's something that we definitely talk about again as we go through this, is just what is really included after you get to the point of, hey, we know we want a BAS system. Well, what should people be familiar with? And, creating that kind of controls manual 101 for being able to utilize your building in the way that it was intended by you lovely engineers and all of us manufacturers. Um, we talked about this one very briefly, the initial cost. So the initial cost can definitely scare some folks off, right? When you come up to somebody and you're like, hey, we need you to invest in all of this hardware and all of this software. There is a cost that's associated with it. That's just the fact of the matter, right? But as we're ensuring that our goals and outcomes are really clear with that building owner, you should be able to leverage that end capability, right? So yes, that initial cost might be a little bit tough pill to swallow up front, but when we can really point to and show all of our long-term ROI, all of our savings, how this is going to make not only your occupant life easier, but all of that energy savings on the back end of things, having that clear goal in mind is really the effective strategy when you talk through the challenge of that upfront cost. Um, I think that last one there, vendor lock-in. Vendor lock-in is one that we hear pretty often, and I'm sure all of you engineers hear on a regular basis, is that, again, you want to make sure that you don't have, or even if you do have it, you want to make sure that you're choosing something that you know what the interoperability with other products is. So having proprietary systems can really limit your flexibility, especially if you have networks that can only talk to their brand. That does create a bit of a problem as you start to scale your buildings. So again, just the combat here, the way to combat this challenge is to specify open protocols and ensure our bacnet compliance. And again, that's something that we'll talk through. But even if you are comfortable with a proprietary vendor, just knowing that that is the choice that you're creating and that you're going to need to build your building strategy around that, that's perfectly acceptable. Again, just being able to address those challenges upfront with the solutions is always kind of our goal when we're talking to these building owners and when we're developing our building automation system. As we go through our specifications and create our sequence of operations, we just want to make sure we know how everything is being connected. A couple of other final challenges here. I think we have a couple more pages of these. Cybersecurity. So we're actually doing a whole presentation on cybersecurity, but this has become a huge talking point. As systems do get increased connectivity, it's great. It's awesome. I can talk to my buddies in China and it's fantastic. I can talk to folks all over the world, but that increased connectivity does come with risks. So you want to make sure that you have all of these clear upfront cybersecurity requirements and verify your compliance. So this is also going to be a big deal when you start talking about different industries and different verticals. So, a government building is going to have a much different cybersecurity plan than maybe a K through 12 or just, a gas station, or, you're going to see different levels, of cybersecurity concerns in different industries. So again, just thinking through those on the front side, making sure that you're verifying with your compliance for whatever building you're actually using this automation system in. Um, data management and analysis is again another challenge. We had this obviously in our benefits as well, because it's a benefit and a challenge. Once you start getting all of this data poured in from all of these different sensors, now it's kind of like, well, what are we going to do with it? We have all of this data coming from every different zone in our building. We're measuring humidity, we're measuring temperature, we're measuring indoor air quality, CO2. We have all of these things, but what do we want to do with it? And that's something that you definitely need to be thinking about on the forward front instead of on the back half of what's your plan? How do you want this data to be presented, and what do you want to actually do with this data? In addition to that, having all of this data does come with its own challenges, again, depending on what industry you're in. So thinking specifically around pharma, there are going to be different levels of data management and data storage that are actually required for different solutions and different verticals. So that's another thing to keep in mind of, hey, maybe you haven't done a pharmaceutical project before, but we know that there are different different certifications that need to happen when it comes to data management and storage. And actually, that brings me directly into that next point there, the regulatory compliance. As we are seeing this industry really start to grow and become a more intelligent industry, we're seeing more and more regulatory compliance, whether that's from a federal level or from a state level. Those first few that I talked about a couple slides ago, those are just 4 of many, many, many that we're starting to see come down the pipeline. Just in 2024 alone, we saw over 90 bills go into regulation from different states around buildings and automation and energy usage and compliance. So it's definitely an industry that is very rapidly changing. And that is something that, building owners are going to look to you engineers to say, hey, we want to make sure that we're not going to get fined because our building isn't smart enough or because we're using too much energy. So just making sure that you keep up to date with those standards and with those regulations, and seek the vendor support. So a lot of times your vendors are going to be able to tell you, yes, our products are going to be in line with all of these industry standards, and they'll be able to kind of break those down for you a little bit better. But it's a rapidly changing industry, and it's definitely one that, we need to keep on top of. So our final few challenges here are going to be around scalability and future proofing. So scalability specifically is a big one. Like I was talking about, we need to make sure that our system is able to adapt to ever-changing needs. So as our controllers are growing, are we able to add I/O modules? If we need to extend our building, how are we going to do that? Are we going to have to run physical cable? Are we going to be able to do it over wireless? And all of these strategies we're going to help you guys develop through this building automation series. But it's definitely something that you need to understand where your user is at, as well as where your user wants to go, and partnering with the correct vendors to get them to that place, right? We want to be able to future proof, but then as we go down the line here, also be able to be compatible with all of our legacy systems. So this is definitely something that we're seeing as a challenge in the industry right now, is the fact that, we're dealing with aging infrastructure. I think probably almost everybody on this call is dealing with a building that might not be from this century. Well, not this century, I suppose, but at least the decade. But, dealing with integrating new components and old components, that is something that is a challenge. So just making sure that your vendor is experienced both with the legacy systems as well as that future proofing systems as well, right? And that final challenge, again, I've kind of given you guys a little bit of a twofold, because occupant comfort was also a benefit. But if you think about it, occupant comfort can also be a challenge, because now you as a building owner have this balance, right? You have to create a balance of your building's efficiency with this comfort and with this occupant comfort that is now readily expected in our industry. So this is, again, the solution to this is really about talking with your user up front and saying, okay, what are your KPIs? Do you want to focus more on energy usage? Do you want to lean towards, that really trimmed down version? Or do you want to focus more on occupancy comfort? And being able to figure out what strategies need to be employed on both to get them to the point that they want to be at when incorporating their building automation system. Final challenge that we have here is our user expectation. So kind of what we were talking about with the fact that now it's like 70% of households have at least one device that is app controlled in their home. As users are experiencing their home lives, they want something that translates to that in a building. So the way this slide looks on the left, we have a mess of BAS products, right? These are those things that in that very first slide, we talked about all these physical components. Not often does our user want to see that. A little kindergartner going to school isn't going to know what all of these things on the left look like, but they might know what something on the right looks like. They might know what an app-based control looks like. So as we are scaling up and as systems are getting smarter and smarter, the user experience and the user expectation is really becoming more and more of a challenge with what is in the home automation market. So again, it's all about the communication when you're talking up front of, how you want this to look in your building and what you want that actual look and feel to be. Just again, something to think about when we start talking about the challenges that you might face when it comes to designing your building automation system. If they want something that doesn't look like a building automation system, they want it to look like an app, that's something that we're going to have to be able to figure out when we're designing the system. I know that this was kind of a truncated version. It's a little bit shorter. We kind of flew through this just a bit, but we are in the home stretch now, and we're going to try and get everybody back on track. So I apologize. But the biggest thing that we really want to focus on just with the idea of BAS 101 is the fact that we are building a automation system that not only promotes that longevity, that user interface, the user experience, but something that has those clear goals and all of that support in mind to make sure we are creating a product and a platform and an experience that our user or our building owner is expecting. So there's a lot of challenges that come with this. But there's also a lot of benefits that come with using a building automation system. In the conclusion here, what we're really focused on and what our learning system is going to, we're going to take you guys through 102, 103, and 104. Where we're really going to get to is how do we take this pie in the sky version of, hey, a building automation system, it sounds great. We want to create a user-friendly experience. We want to make sure we're monitoring all of our energy usage. This sounds great. How do we get there? And what do we need to focus on? That's what we're really going to be building towards in this learning series with our BLITZ, right? We want to be able to make sure that you're getting what is expected when you're starting to use this building automation system in general. So that's really the thick of it when it comes to just this overarching building automation system theory. Does anybody have kind of some questions? I know we're kind of butting up on that time to get us done by 12 Eastern. That way we can, get it moving for the next one. But that's really where we're at in our building automation series. We're going to keep going. Our series 102 will focus a lot on the inner workings of now we know what that building automation system wants to do. Well, how do we take it from point A to point B? What do we need to focus on? What sensors are going to look like? How that actually is communicating with controllers. And we're going to talk with you guys about that in probably the next, I believe, 15 minutes, if I'm seeing that schedule right. Moose, do we know what our schedule is going to look like? I think we're going to try and start back up at 12:30 on the next one. Hi, or 12:15. What do we think?
I could do 12:15. I could do earlier. Doesn't matter. Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah, let's do 12:15. Yep. We'll
Okay,
be using this same link if for anyone who registered for the next ones. We'll be using this same Teams link, so we're gonna keep it live all day, and we're just gonna hop on here and square away with you guys. All right, thank you, Emily. That was wonderful.
perfect. Okay, so just as a recap, we are going to just keep this Teams link open so you guys can just stay logged in, and the next presentations will just keep flowing through. Plan to be back here for BAS 102 at 12:15, and we will update the schedule and send out another email update to you guys to make sure that we're all on the same page with all of our technical difficulties. All right, I'm seeing some thumbs up, so I'm just gonna turn myself on mute and turn my camera off and get you guys going for BS 102.